Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. In today's conversation, I'm sitting down with an amazing individual named Jono Luk. Now, our conversation today is going to cover a wide array of topics, but primarily, we're going to be talking about the challenges that we face in our society from a mental and a behavioral health perspective. We're going to talk about the impact of these little devices on how we see the world. We're also going to talk about the current landscape of mental and behavioral health services in a city like Seattle, but more importantly, how we can take a fresh perspective and meeting the challenges of our communities through the lens of innovation in technology. Now, Jono's an amazing leader, but he also has a technical background in working for some of the largest tech companies in the world, managing teams and developing better products. Today's going to be an amazing conversation. Let's get into it.
I feel in a lot of ways, telehealth has helped to lower some of the negative stigma around seeking help. If I can, on my phone, for example, right, leveraging an app or even just connecting with my provider, have a more confidential conversation than walking into the clinic, being seen, that's reduced that barrier to seeking help. And so the third element almost behind convenience, if you will, right, the immediacy, the delivery, is that privacy and confidentiality, which I believe to be a good thing. Right, be a good thing because more people are willing to reach out when they need it. It's generational and personal preference, but that doesn't matter because it's how I choose, like you said, to get my information, to engage, to ask for help, to whatever that thing is. And 100%, we need to have that flexibility so anybody is able to engage the way that they want.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. I'm incredibly excited because I have an individual here with me, Jono, who is a self-proclaimed champion for telehealth, a champion for telemedicine, an executive in residence at the UW Foster School of Business, and the president of the board at an amazing organization called Therapeutic Health Services. Jono, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
This is going to be an exciting conversation. We're going to talk about mental health. We're going to talk about the intersection of technology and everything that's kind of going on in our society today, in the community. And so I really want to kind of give everybody a little bit of a background about you and how you find yourself being a champion for not only mental health, substance use, but all the other things that are in between. So why don't you give yourself a little bit of an introduction, man?
Sure. So first of all, my name's Jono Luk, as you already said. I live in Seattle, Washington. And how I kind of got involved with all of this, I actually have had my own journey of mental health and working with counselors to discuss just things on and off throughout my life. I would say I've been fortunate because I do believe that talking to someone that has no investment other than to hear you out is such a helpful thing. It's not because I like to hear my own voice. It's because I truly believe, right, having that other party there. But also throughout the years, healthcare, I truly believe it to be one of the most important things we can all do. Right, helping other people, providing those things. And so whether it be through work, so I currently work with Cisco with WebEx, although I'll be switching companies very shortly. The work there to support telehealth during COVID, great example where it wasn't a nice to have, it was a necessity so people could gain access to care. But afterwards also realizing that same technology can expand who can gain access to care. Just because I live in a city 5 blocks away from my healthcare provider doesn't mean that should limit me from getting help. People that live in rural communities, right? That's where telehealth, as you mentioned, telehealth, telemedicine, both sides of those can materially improve people's access to care. There's certain things you got to come in for. Like you got to go in to have a procedure done. But especially in the realm of, I think, mental health, behavioral health, and substance abuse, there's so much good we can do leaning on these kinds of tools and technologies. And that's where with Therapeutic Health Services, we are moving into those spaces as well, right? So I'm super excited about what we can do. And the flip side, I see the need. I really do, right? Some people say it's kind of before COVID, it was different, post-COVID. I can say right here, Seattle, Washington, King County, 10% or more of adults are saying that they've had at least 2 weeks of mental health, kind of instability over the past month or so. 2 weeks, half the month, something has been ailing them. That alone should be reason and cause, right? To find a way to provide people what they need, support them through those bumps. I'm also gay. So the LGBTQ plus community has a 2x likelihood of mental health and behavioral health needs. And so there's even more that we can do to make that better. And I'm fortunate because I'm able to support and participate in that delivery of care.
The unique perspective of you being an outsider, I'll say not coming through the therapeutic lens of going to school, becoming a therapist and being a champion for things like telemedicine is super important, because when I started our company back in 2014, I was looked at like I had 6 eyes on my head when I would walk into the conference room of a hospital and say, there's going to be a need for this virtual connectivity. They said it's going to take away from the experience. Nobody wants to do that, but we weren't thinking about the upside.
Right.
How do you kind of think about your role as an outsider being on the board at Therapeutic Health Services and helping them kind of navigate the future of technological connectiveness when it comes to healthcare services?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought that up as a theme, right? Outsiders sometimes can be seen as a bad thing. What I'll actually call it is diversity. Diversity of experience, background, and expertise. Those opinions, multiple opinions, lead to a better outcome. That's how I think of kind of what you're describing there, right? And so myself with a technology background, and a business background, working with THS, I can come in with some of those things and go, but you can do this different. I know you can do it different because I've done it over here. So that diversity of opinion and experience means that reality is probably somewhere in between, but we can move towards a different and ideally better way of delivering care, right? Leveraging technology, again, not only to replace for convenience, but also to improve access. Right, giving more people more places, because something else with THS, Therapeutic Health Services, a lot of our community and program members actually, they come through Medicaid, right? They are in different socioeconomic backgrounds where travel is not always possible. So that democratization of access to care is such a big part. And I think it's because of that diversity. If it's more of the same, you don't always think about different ways, right, to change it. And so I think it's valuable. And I hope if THS people are listening and watching, they find it valuable as well to have that debate about what could we do differently and why.
Well, we don't have the luxury in healthcare to stand on our hill anymore.
Right.
The one thing that I always talk about in modern day leadership, no matter what segment of business you're in, technology, services, commodities, or healthcare, you have to be curious to be able to explore different avenues to get the job done. How do you think you as a leader in your organization and on the board kind of leverage curiosity as a way to kind of be a wayfinder for new possibilities?
I think, so 2 things that kind of speak to what you're describing there. First of all, we're a nonprofit. Nonprofit means a lot of things when it comes to taxes and how the government views. But the thing that I think is most interesting and therefore meaningful towards that curiosity is we can't afford to do everything. We do not have the luxury of billions of dollars sitting in bank accounts everywhere. So we have to get creative, therefore curious about how can we do this better, right? So I think that's very much a driver for it. We have this many customers, we have this many patients and community members looking for help. We can only help this many. There's a difference and a gap that has to be closed. How do you do that? Right. And so that drives the need for what can we do differently, that curiosity. In fact, something I'm really excited about with Therapeutic Health Services is we're actually looking at a different approach to meet people in the community where they are. So in the same way that telehealth and telemedicine allow for you to be one place and me, a clinician, to be another, we're looking at how can we provide support with substance abuse and behavioral health, leveraging mobile units. Right. So that's an example of changing the paradigm to meet the patients where they are, where they need, and not require them to change how they're getting to work and thinking about their day to day. So that's an example of where necessity drove through curiosity an improvement in care delivery.
I want to look at that through the lens of consumer behavior. And I only say that because in today's society, we expect everything on demand, AKA either it's going to be instantaneously available, which is the role of telehealth and creating that instantaneous access, or it's going to be delivered to us. And I feel like there's an interesting dynamic of consumer behavior today when we look at healthcare services, where these type of organizations across the entire spectrum of healthcare need to adapt to be a little bit more aligned with that consumer behavior or the expectation that comes along with that stuff. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. I'm actually going to add a third dimension to that, which is confidentiality and privacy. I feel in a lot of ways, telehealth has helped to lower some of the negative stigma around seeking help. If I can, on my phone, for example, right, leveraging an app or even just connecting with my provider, have a more confidential conversation than walking into the clinic, being seen, that's reduced that barrier to seeking help. And so the third element almost behind convenience, if you will, right, the immediacy, the delivery, is that privacy and confidentiality, which I believe to be a good thing, right? Be a good thing because more people are willing to reach out when they need it. But going back to the convenience and the consumerism, like you said, behind it, I think it's true, right? In a lot of cases, I feel like people ask, if I can do this in other parts of my life, why can't I do it here? And usually consumer behaviors drive improvement in technology, in healthcare, government, et cetera. Think about how we vote. Think about how we do things. There's a convenience element now behind some of these, right? And so it's a good thing that those expectations are set because it shows it can be done. And I'm using healthcare again, obviously, the topic du jour, telehealth. The world will not go back to mandating everyone walk into a physical location. Why? Because for 3 years, you didn't have to. So again, it wasn't even consumerism per se. Again, it was necessity, but it's I could do it before. You bet I want to keep doing it now. And that's going to now be a new kind of bar set so that we can ask the next question of, well, why can't we have this convenience? And again, often driven by consumerism. And one of these things too, this is consumerism at its best, right? I get access to everything. I message my care provider. I can get my prescription filled and it'll keep raising that bar. And I think that's how we get more care to more people. And again, kind of reducing some of that stigma around that, because if everybody's doing it, then it might be okay for me to get help too.
I mean, you're 1,000% right. And it's interesting when I kind of reverse back into the early days of me trying to pitch telehealth to these large health systems, they always talked about the lack of human connection here is a barrier because it takes away from the experience.
Right.
And it was interesting because the human connection in a lot of elements like talking about mental health is a barrier for us to be able to raise our hand in the first place.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people today have gotten used to being able to stand behind that safety net of that technological divide to be able to divulge and be vulnerable about things that we're dealing with that often I couldn't have a conversation with Jono about in a room full of other people because I feel that pressure. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And kind of as an example of that, we during the pandemic, we saw this. A lot of people are willing to send a message, an SMS or a chat in an app that they're not necessarily willing to verbalize when looking eye to eye. To your point, right? Again, that's where in some cases it's a different kind of privacy. It feels safer to initiate that way and seek help. And then it could escalate into, okay, well, we should have a voice conversation or look at each other over video. You're right. I think, again, it lowers that almost that bar to engage because it's easier for me to ask for help, to engage with, who a provider to get that.
And isn't that kind of thinking about where we're going, right? And one of the sayings I've been hearing a lot on the podcast recently is like skate to where the puck is going as a hockey reference, right? And if I think about,
I don't know if you can see that. So you won me right there.
There you go. Right. Exactly. One of the things I think about is like the way in which younger demographics and generations communicate today.
Yep.
Gen Z, huge on Snapchat, loves to send text messages back and forth. That's the way in which they open doors, build relationships. So why shouldn't we be thinking about future proofing? I use that word very intentionally, the healthcare system by creating that optionality for people to be able to reach out to their healthcare provider and start a conversation the same way they would with their friends and family. And that's something that only seems to make sense to me. And I feel like it's going to be a huge part of the overall communication strategy of healthcare in the future.
Yeah, you're 100% right. The thing I'm not countering, but I say it's an and. It is preference. So for example, my mother prefers to walk into her doctor's office. It's, in this case, it's a generational preference. But the point is, right, it's a preference, but it can be so much more effective if they have the right preference at hand. Right? I will text. The joke is I will do everything I can sometimes to not walk into a place. I'll do it over message. And she does everything she can to walk in. It's generational and personal preference, but that doesn't matter because it's how I choose, like you said, to get my information, to engage, to ask for help, to whatever that thing is. And 100%, we need to have that flexibility so anybody is able to engage the way that they want.
Yeah, I mean, I think in our last conversation, we were talking about the optionality, right, of delivery is incredibly important. And that was one of the things I talked about in our previous conversation was the difference between telehealth and telemedicine. Telemedicine, the asynchronous transaction for billable services, me delivering medical services over video, audio, whatever that could be. Telehealth is the use of all different types of pieces of technology to help somebody through their care journey. And it's that optionality of saying, out of these 6 options, which works best for you is how I think we need to think about the flexible future of healthcare.
Yes, 100%. And I think technology has given us the ability to offer those options, right? Whereas before it was walk in, be told you're ninth in line and wait. So I think we're in a better place today than arguably even 5 years ago, so to speak.
No, I totally agree. I would love to kind of take the conversation in the direction of AI.
Yep.
But before we get there, let's talk about the way in which we are influenced, if you will, by things like social media algorithms. In our previous conversation, you said this so succinctly. You said these social media platforms almost act as an echo chamber. And although we as humans say, I only like nice things, I like positive people, it's interesting to see what happens when you look at somebody's For You page on Instagram. It's a complete depiction in little micro moments and little pieces of content of who they are and what they're interested in. Let's kind of riff on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think since we chatted last time, even I've tried to refine it a bit more. The word that comes to mind when I think of social media platforms in general is curation. Right. And then there's the technology of AI and algorithms. But the whole point is, how am I going to put things together that you want to see? Sometimes that's in service of a commercial outcome. You're going to buy stuff, right? Other times it's, I want to keep you using this app. It is an app. It is a platform. And so showing you more things that you engage with will beget more things that you want to see. And then that is the echo chamber effect. And where I have some issues sometimes with social media platforms is, but it's not clear to me, the user of this application, right? TikTok, Snap, whatever, maybe more TikTok and Instagram, for example, that's curated. And so it becomes a biased view on the bajillions of videos out there. And I mean, let's be clear. We're right now in a very contentious election cycle. It's a perfect example of where social media and the curation by algorithms can actually lead to behavioral health and mental health issues. It's frustrating, it's exhausting, you feel down about things. And so it's a perfect example where people forget sometimes, just because you saw 7 things in a row doesn't mean there weren't 1,400 other things. It's that this app, this platform gave you those 7 things. That echo chamber can be dangerous. And so I think there is something there, right? About how we need to remember, take that step away from your app, your phone, or however you're getting that.
In 2012, I moved to Las Vegas, and at the point in time, I was about 285 pounds. So I was a little bit heavier, during those days. And during in New Year of 2013, I moved in with my best friend and now business partner, Dante McLean, and he challenged me to go to the gym every single day. First couple months, I was going to the gym, but I wasn't paying attention to what my diet was. And when I wasn't eating properly, I wasn't fueling my body, and I would feel bad during my workouts. I bring that up to bring this up. Over the last year or so, I've been messing around with the framework of our mental health diet. The things that we consume mentally and eat mentally have a direct impact on us the same way that our physical diet does on our physical health.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's really important for people to understand and curate the diet that we consume mentally. And I want to back this up with some statistics. In 2012, when social media really became a thing, there's a statistic that said girls below the age of 18 often had highly depressive episodes at a rate of 9%. Okay. As of the most recent data in 2023, 31% of girls today have highly depressive episodes because of the attribution of social media.
Yep.
What do you think is going on with that huge escalation, and why are we not paying attention to the I would say canary in the coal mine the way that we should be based on that data and that trend?
You're asking some hard questions there. First of all, I mean, while shocking, it's not surprising that growth, right, in the percentage of, why are we not recognizing? It's interesting. I do hear people talk about it. Right, whether it be at the government level, whether it be at the social level, my friends and I, they have kids, they have daughters that are turning 16. Everyone recognizes the risk of that. And by the way, I loved the curating of the mental health diet concept. It's so true. Remember about 15 years ago, maybe this actually bringing this around in a moment, but 15, 20 years ago, the organic movement, the GMO, non-GMO, there was suddenly an awareness that a chicken is not a chicken necessarily. A chicken could be this chicken or that chicken, right? The KFC jokes and all those. But there was an awareness, and then suddenly there was classification. And so that tells me that the society demanded a framework to make things better, right? I think you're 100% spot on with that curation. I'm hoping that we're going to hit that moment soon with those statistics, right? But it takes time. Because, and rightly so, we are debating, is this freedom of information? Does this company have the right to curate in this way. That's why we live in this great society where we can debate. But we have to get to the same kind of framework to allow people to curate their mental health diet, right? I think, as an example, a reset my algorithm button, so that I can at any point in time unbiased it. Just do it by time index. Show me all the stuff. I bet you, if you ran them side by side, people's minds would be blown by what I would have seen and reset my algorithm what I do see. It's just like on Instagram when you can unfollow, unblock the things you blocked. You're controlling that. But that's not at the fore. That's not something that's right there telling me, right? I feel like that's the turn we're about to make. And so I'm hoping that we take a similar approach to what we did with organics, non-GMO. I mean, Whole Foods classifies their turkeys and chickens, right? Like with how much, maybe that's a bit extreme, but the awareness of me, the consumer, going back to the consumerism, right? Me, the awareness to make a decision, and the control to choose, maybe again, biased, unbiased, whatever the classifications are, will be necessary. And then making kids aware as they grow into adults, then that way they can go, well, I'm not feeling great because look at what I saw, but there's all this other stuff, right? So everything starts with awareness. And so I think, yeah, it's interesting you brought up the diet concept. That is what's needed, I think, in a lot of ways.
But it comes back to that element of awareness, which in today's world is incredibly, incredibly tough to do. Here's a good example. I always talk about the different influences that generations dealt with, right? I think today's generation, no matter what generation you're a part of, if you have a device in your hand, you're a part of the digital generation that is dealing with the element of distraction more so than any other generation ever has.
Yep.
Because back in the day, there was a moral panic about distraction being in the form of a kaleidoscope. There were news articles that were released saying children are letting their minds rot away because they're looking into kaleidoscopes all day. They don't want to be here in reality.
Right.
But today, the average 18-year-old spends about 9 hours per day on their device. They spend more time on their device than they do on average sleeping. So if you think about which world is becoming real, the digital world is more real than ever, and we have to be able to establish guidelines that help us curate the information that we're consuming, because your worldview can be easily manipulated by an algorithm. And I want to reverse a little bit farther back. You had mentioned, should this individual company have the responsibility of curating data? I was listening to a podcast yesterday with the former head of Google X, and he was talking about, we think that there are companies behind the algorithm at Instagram or TikTok making choices and pulling strings about what information Jono and Keenan are going to see. But really, they're allowing for those algorithms to operate on their own. So they don't even truly or understand the ramifications of how these algorithms are serving information and images to the people around them. Do you think that's a little bit of a dangerous step to not have human oversight at scale, which I guess is really impossible?
Yeah. Do I think it's a dangerous thing? In the most general sense, I think it is, right? I think, however, you can counter that by sharing the why, right? Going back to the why are you seeing this? We see that sometimes in places. Why are you seeing this ad, right? And they can kind of tell you. That begins to chip away at the problem of recognizing if something is biased or going a certain path. But again, it goes back to awareness of me, an individual, wanting to know that, and then potentially course correcting, right? Being cognizant that this isn't a good thing. I'm going down a rat hole, of a bunch of these. I should pull back up. Awareness. It starts with awareness in so many cases. And something you talked about, the mobile device and the digital generation. I actually want to tie this a bit to almost substance abuse. And because I can't remember, I'm going to butcher it. If you want, I can find you the article. But I was reading where every time this screen lights up, a little bit of chemical fires off in my head, right? There is I can't remember which chemical it was, but it's a good chemical, good feeling chemical. And we've become dependent on that in some cases because it feels good, stuff is coming. And so now I'm just sucked even more into this universe, like you said, the digital reality, not the reality, which then just exacerbates this problem, right? So I think it's very much how the phone has become the extension of my body and what I'm getting through there.
So there's an amazing book. It's called Indistractable. Okay. And it was actually found or written by a guy named Nir Eyal, Eyal. Eyal? Okay. Anyway, his book talks about this exact concept, which is a lot of people today are not, and I'm not trying to throw shade or I'm not trying to disprove anybody, but he says a lot of people today are diagnosed or they believe that they have ADHD. Okay.
Right.
One of the key elements of that is the fact that nobody today can regulate their emotions. Let me give you an example. Any single time you're in a public space, in a mall, in a grocery store, in the gym, where people are standing around or standing next to other people, what's the first thing that they do, Jono?
Next to each other?
Think about this and think about this in your mind.
Yeah.
If people are standing in line at the grocery store or they're standing in line at the mall,
Yeah.
often what are they doing while they're standing in line?
They're on their phones.
They're on their phones. Exactly. And so what he talks about is the fact that whenever we feel uncomfortable, we feel a little bit awkward, we don't have a human connection where we can have a conversation, what behavior have we created as a habit through hundreds of thousands, if not millions of repeated actions? We pull out our phone.
Oh.
And often if you look at somebody's device, they're not even doing anything. They're literally just like flipping back and forth between their screens. They're not texting anybody.
Yeah.
That is a lack of emotional regulation.
So I would never have categorized it, but I see it as such. And I can totally vouch for that because I travel a lot for work by myself. And usually I eat the restaurant downstairs because it's the easiest thing to do. And all the business travelers are on their phone. And you're right. Half the time it's flipping back and forth. It's not towards, and it's aimlessly using this device because I don't want to sit there and watch the TV or stare at something. It's really interesting you bring that up. That's entirely true. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting concept, but when we have these small little actions that are built into habitual habits, I think about the amount of time when we lose opportunities to have human connection. Yeah. I remember growing up, I was born in 1990, so I'm like right in the middle of being a millennial. I remember people, my parents and that further generation saying, you guys don't know how to communicate with each other. You have no interpersonal skills. You can't talk to anybody anymore. You guys just want to text. If I think about that extrapolated into the future, where we now have children who are born and tossed an iPad at the age of 2, and every single time that they get upset or throw a tantrum, their parents feed them with that digital horizon of infiniteness. What are they going to be when they get to be adults? Are they going to be able to have resiliency to overcome tough times? Mm-hmm. What are they going to do when they have lack of emotional regulation? Yep. What are the behaviors that we're going to see downhill? And it ties back into that substance use and that substance disorder, right? Of people using things to escape instead of sitting with those feelings.
Yeah, I think, we used to, or I think we still do, but coping skills is one way to describe the how do you handle a situation. By the way, it can apply equally to a great situation as a bad situation. Usually it's more bad, right? Because you cope with the bad, but you're right. How do you handle a given interaction or situation? Something that's interesting though, Keenan, I mean, you and I have never met in person, but because of the way that we communicate, I do feel a connection with you. We're having a really meaningful conversation, but it's not the norm over text or video or audio, right? And I feel like it's possible, but it's not a skill that we teach kids. When you have 30 kids in a classroom together or playing a sport, soccer, hockey, football, they're learning that collegiality and how to interact with one another. Like you said about the iPad, it's usually put up as a coping, don't scream in the restaurant, just watch your movie. Yep. And that's where it's doing a disservice to a technology, because iPads used for behavioral health, virtual, that's a good thing. And so I feel like it's how these tools are introduced, used, and taught that can make all the difference.
And where's the sense of accountability, right? I bring that in because often I am the victim of hearing a lot of examples of 8th place trophies, 7th place trophies, right? But my rebuttal to that element of people saying, well, your generation is soft because you got 8th place trophies, I always asked, who raised us? Because I was not the 5-year-old who was inside the trophy store saying, I want the 8th place trophy for me and my friends who aren't going to win a single game in this soccer tournament.
Right.
So where's the sense of accountability that goes back to looking at who were the people who had the responsibility at the time but dropped the ball, and now we're dealing with the lagging effects or the lagging indicators, if you will, of those bad decisions.
So I'm going to take a slightly broader answer to your question too. One of the problems I think we often hit, right, and this goes to the accountability problem, is it can't always be the same person in each situation, right? So we talk about school, or at least I brought up the example of school, classroom, or coach, or parent, or guardian. Different family circumstances necessitate different people to play that role. That's the bigger thing I'll say. For example, something I am super passionate about with THS is we have a youth and family services group that help and support And the thing I've come to recognize and appreciate is it's not the same answer for every kid, parent, guardian, grandparent, because the situation's different. And so back to accountability, I don't know that we can say this, that, or the other. I think that it becomes almost like a personal mandate to be that if someone can't be that. I have a really great friend. He was effectively raised by his neighbors, or his best friend neighbor's mom, as part of the family, because that was the group that could provide stability, teaching, accountability. Others, you hear great stories about, the football coach was that person in their life. And so I don't know there's a one size fits all answer, but for you and I, others that are listening, because we care if we're listening to this podcast, I think it's our responsibility to try to be that person. And sometimes it's a one-to-one. Sometimes it can be a one-to-many through supporting groups or others, right? That's kind of a wishy-washy answer and a feel-good answer, but I actually believe it to be true. There is no one-size-fits-all, but every kid needs that role model almost, right? Which is a way of driving accountability. Do as I do, show, lead by example. That's going to make us better later. And that also includes, by the way, the right to be vulnerable. I think something that, as I talk to a lot of folks over the last several years about mental and behavioral health, a lot of the generation that's kind of in their 40s and 50s now, they talk about their dads saying, you got to do this. This is what men do. And I think that there's a lot of that weighs heavy on people but that's not me. Am I wrong? And so that whole just supporting and embracing difference, kind of going back to the different opinion, diversity opinion, is also an important part of that accountability, because each kid is different. Each adult is different.
I want to talk a little bit about the concept of happiness. So when you think about happiness, what does that mean to you?
So I have probably a different definition now than even when we chatted last. The reason why I say that is my husband and I are starting surrogacy. And I now realize how looking forward to being a parent, for me personally, is making me so happy. Like having silly conversations about, well, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do when that happens? Makes me happy, right? And the reason why I kind of leave with that example is, again, I think it's different for everyone. And there is no long duration for definition of it. It is probably time and place. But I think safety is a big underlying part of it, right? Being able to be yourself, feeling safe in all the, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those fundamental primal, through to the ability to express yourself and be yourself. That's probably at the heart of happiness. What you want to do, think, believe, that's you. But the ability to believe, think, and do, that's that safety. And I think, that's at the heart of it.
I mean, I love that answer. And I only bring that up because you have been fortunate enough to be very successful in your professional life, right? And often I feel like there is a misnomer in society today where if you attain a certain amount of money, if you attain a certain title, you're going to find happiness. But let me tell you what, I have had $6.46 in my bank account, and I've had a lot more money in my bank account. I've been able to buy cars and go on vacations and things like that. When I think about the definition of happiness, I worry that we are chasing materialistic ideas instead of truly understanding what is fulfilling. And so I could not be happier to think about how you answered that question, thinking about yourself in a future state, being able to raise a child, being able to have all of those micro interactions is a true definition of happiness. It doesn't seem like you put a lot of value on the dollar, if that's true.
No, 100% correct. And this is where I'm glad you bring that up too, because growing up, first of all, I fully appreciate my parents so much. They were here visiting this past week, right? We even talked about this. Money wasn't easy. It was paycheck to paycheck, but the realization that if you have money, you can buy things that can so easily be, I'll use the word perverted into, that's happiness then because I wanted it and now I have it. That's not happiness. It can lead to safety, that concept, because if I know that I don't have to worry, right, that I know where this dinner is coming from and that I can feed and provide, there's a safety element there. But yeah, it's a very, very nuanced difference that a lot of folks, because if you didn't have something before and now you can, well, that must be happiness because I got what I wanted. I'll be honest though, right? I mean, I'm 42 now. it took me a long time to get to the place where I have happiness. Like I got married 2 years ago. And now I realize what those things are. And you're right. None of it had to do with how many zeros were in my bank account, whether it be zero, or many zeros, right? And guess what? He or she who dies with the most money still dies. So you might as well die with really good memories. That was something someone said to me a long time ago. And I think it's even more true now, right? Looking back at the things that you did, the people you were with, how you helped someone, going back to that accountability and leading into people in your life, right? That's what's going to matter. And so I'm actually really glad you bring that up.
And I feel like that's kind of where my heart sits today. Once again, I was listening to that podcast and I was talking to, or I was just listening to that podcast the other night, the former head of Google X, and he was talking about how his son died at the age of 21 named Ali. And he died because of a simple, like appendectomy, right? His appendix was bad and they messed up, and unfortunately his son died. And in that moment, he said, I could have chosen to live a life of sorrow, or I could try and make as many people happy like my son would have wanted me to do. Mm-hmm. And I recognize that happiness never came with the first car that I bought, but I did make the mistake saying that it's not the right color, so I'm going to buy another one, until he got to the 16th vehicle and he realized that none of these materialistic items are the things that actually fill my soul. It's the time I have with my daughter. It's the time I get to spend with my grandchildren. It's all the micro memories that we'll remember at the end of the day. But we just are in such this flux of materialism in society. I mean, when I look at a lot of people who are idols to younger men, I see people who are either making a ton of money, living in Dubai, driving a Lambo, live in Miami, live in all these places. But then I think, like, as I've gone down the path, those things are so short-lived. And at the end of the day, they can disappear, and then you're left with yourself only. And if you're not happy with yourself, you're going to find yourself in a really tough position.
Oh, 100%. 100% agree.
It's just, it's an interesting time. I want to talk about, as we kind of start wrapping this up a little bit, man, time has been flying. This has been a great conversation.
You said turn. I was like, oh, Jesus, this has been great. So, yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about AI. So recognizing that you are in the technology space, you're also a prominent leader in a healthcare organization. How are you guys kind of thinking about AI in the future? Is there a role to be played in the space of healthcare? Do we have to overcome some mindsets that often are not quickly adaptable in healthcare from a leadership position? What do you think the future is going to look like over the next couple of years?
So first of all, you asked like a dissertation length question. So I'll try to squish it down. I absolutely think AI has a role, not just in healthcare, but everywhere in life. The second part, though, the how does it fit in? What do we have to do? Like AI, if done wrong, is Skynet level bad, right? I think about healthcare. If AI gives the wrong answer, you ask a question, it should have said, go see your doctor. Instead, it says, take 4 of these things. That is fundamentally not the right thing. Like there's a right and a wrong. So we have to get it right. And there's a progression from where we are today with humans saying something, a doctor, a pharmacist, to AI telling you. Along the way, there's a ton of testing, a ton of observation. The phrase often used is a human in the loop, meaning the AI may suggest it, but I'm going to say as a second opinion, yes, before it gets sent to you. Those are the kinds of things, right, that will allow AI to be brought in and help scale out care delivery. There's a stat out there recently where they said that AI in, I believe it was early breast cancer screening, was able to improve the efficiency of radiologists because it did a first pass, right? It would say yes, no, and call out this thing. And then a human could say yes, no, but they could do so many more reviews, in a smaller period of time, more people got care. That's how we should think of AI. Right. And again, it's an incremental step towards that. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think about AI is it also then means that we can take that same technology and put it into the hands of folks that otherwise might not have been able to get care. Going back to the example of telehealth in this particular case, access to, right, a visit of some form. Well, what if where we don't have doctors today, we can leverage AI that's been proven as a way to provide some of that base level answer, Q&A, and a correct WebMD. The most dangerous thing about WebMD is I interpreted what I Googled and found, right? And so the flip of that is AI is telling you. But again, if we've taught it correctly, it can give so many more people some of the safer answers to questions and therefore improve scale, right? The scale of that care delivery, or as we talk about behavioral health. if people are comfortable with it, why wouldn't I perhaps bounce some ideas back and forth, with think of it as we used to call them bots, right? These virtual therapists, and kind of go from there. It could ask me questions. I talked about therapy. I believe in therapy very much, but it's dig at the first couple questions. I don't need that to be a human. I would be comfortable with that, with the right privacy and all those things, right? So I think it can materially change who and how we can deliver care too.
I mean, I think about it as being an accelerator, not a replacement.
Yes,
right?
correct.
I think it's going to have to be positioned that way because, historically, from my experience in the behavioral health space, is anybody going back to the very beginning of our conversation who is an outsider, who has a different perspective, is often looked at as a threat. And the one thing that I do not want our licensed mental health professionals to think today is that technology is coming to replace them. But we need to look at it as an accelerator that helps them do more with less. Because we've talked about some of the nonprofit challenges when it comes to funding, reimbursement, acquiring talent. We're having a really tough time out here in a lot of our states because a lot of the times funding is 75, 80% of what's necessary to cover services. But what are we supposed to do with that delta of 15%? Go out into the community and fundraise? When it sounds like we have such a pent-up demand for services like mental and behavioral health in our communities, we need 150% of resources to get all these people back to baseline where they can be advocates for themselves. And I think that unless we look at technology with that lens of curiosity, I'll bring that word back into the conversation, and think about how it can be positioned, we're doing ourselves and our communities a huge disservice.
Oh, absolutely. And when you talk about meeting demand, I want to go back to something. We've thrown some numbers out over the course of the conversation. I would any day, anytime, put my hand up and say, I think these numbers are easily 40% below what the truth is. Because again, there's stigma behind sometimes asking for help, saying yes on a check in the checkbox in an intake form. And so while you said 70 to 80%, the reality probably is there's more demand than we actually even know. And so the more we can have these tools that help people meet them where they are, again, right, that preference, that optionality, I really do think we will make it better. We will give them ways, right, to ask for help, reach out for help, and get help.
Jono, I want to say thank you so much for this time that we've spent together. It's gone by so quickly, but the conversation has been so valuable to me and to everybody who's tuning in, listening, and watching today. We have a tradition here where we like to link our last episode with today's episode by having our previous guest ask you a question. Okay. Previous guest, their question was, what is the one major setback that you obviously wouldn't want to have, but because you had it, it transcended you forward in a massive way?
The one setback that transcended me forward, I'll use this example because it's actually very timely for myself right now. People are always their worst critic, right? So expectation, personal expectation, and then usually reality or self-assessed reality is somewhere in between. And so in that way, I think this is for myself recently as well. I realized I can't perform at the level that I want to perform in a certain thing, right? And that actually triggered, speaking of health and therapy, conversations, introspection on, but what is it exactly that I wanted? What was this? And so that setback, I took a break from work for a little bit and all these things to reassess, actually set me on this new path. Right. And so it was a setback, but I didn't ask that question. I just kept running the rat race and the hamster wheel. And this is what I thought I needed to do. And in reality, I didn't know why, except that was the thing I needed to do. And then taking that step back, it actually allowed me to say, you know what? That's not the thing. This is the other thing. And now I'm going to go chase that path, chase my heart and reassess, right? And then set new priorities, set new focus. So for me personally, that literally just happened in the last 3 months of this journey, this change in course. And I'm thankful for it, right? Every time you have a chance to reassess, and you should be thankful to be able to make a change, a course correction. It's not always possible. And that's why I am thankful that I'm able to do that. I hope that meets the spirit of the question as it was asked, though.
No, it definitely does, Jono, man. I just can't thank you enough for once again coming on the show. This has been such a spirited conversation, and I'm definitely going to have you back here in the future, in the very near future. Any closing words? When you have something that you want to leave on the mind of all the people who are tuning into this, what do you want to say to them as they leave?
First of all, I want to say thank you for all that you do, right? These conversations, again, drive awareness. Imagine that. It drives awareness. But for all of us, it kind of came up in that theme of accountability. People have the luxury of listening to this podcast, however they're consuming it, wherever, whenever. Ask yourself, can I be helping those around me a different way? When I talked about it's a different shape for everyone, it's similar to a while back we said you don't always know if someone's having a mental health crisis. All you can do is ask. And so I implore everyone listening here, yourself and myself included, to always be willing to ask, right? Because you don't know when your question may be the thing that gets people on a path that helps prevent something that otherwise is not a great outcome. So that's what I ask everyone that's listening, yourself and I.
Well, I appreciate that, man. Once again, this has been another episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. That's a wrap. Catch you guys in the next one.